Hey guys, Mike from mikesgaminggala here, and in case you haven't heard, you probably have, it's all over YouTube. Last week, Atari's been at it again, and they purchased Digital Eclipse. Instead of making a video right when it came out, when that news came out, I decided, you know what, I'm going to take the weekend, I'm going to think about it, and just kind of give my opinions and speculations on not what it means. I think it's pretty obvious what it means, but kind of where Atari may be headed and what I would like to see out of Atari. So everything here is pure speculation on my part. There won't actually be much speculation, but none of what I'm going to talk about, aside from the fact that they've been acquired, is fact or insider information or anything like that. So Digital Eclipse, again, for those who don't know, they're probably most famous right now for being the company that put together the Atari 50 collection. They did an absolutely fantastic job with that. Videos, games, just everything worked so well together. I think it's probably the best compilation cart that's ever come out. I absolutely love it. I've played it through. There's unlockables. They did a really good job with that. And what they also are kind of known for is really good quality ports and remasters of older games. So it's right up Atari's alley. Atari has been making a lot of acquisitions in the last couple of years, and you know, most famously recently, anyhow, is acquiring Atari Age, and they really seem to be gearing up. I've liked a lot of what Atari's done over, especially the last year. Atari Age, I mean, we'll see how that ends up. There's still a lot of questions there as to, you know, what they're going to do with that forum, but thus far it's been left untouched, and it is a good acquisition for them, and Albert, as historian for Atari, you know, something that he's perfectly suited to. With Digital Eclipse, now what they're doing is they're kind of bringing on board the production aspect. Like, they can now make games. It's like when Microsoft owned Bungie, or when Nintendo kind of had an exclusive situation with Rare. And I think that what Atari's really kind of looking to do right now is, with Digital Eclipse specifically, is going to be more kind of remasters of the titles that they own and the properties that they own, which is not a bad move. So usually when you acquire, as a business, when you acquire another business, you do it for a multitude of reasons, but really there's two main ones. It's either to remove a competitor and kind of absorb it into your own, or to acquire something that you don't have. And Atari did not have this kind of game creation capability, and now with this acquisition they do. So again, Digital Eclipse specializing in ports, specializing on dealing with old licenses. It's a good move for Atari. Atari's been doing a lot of acquiring. I would like to see them do more producing. Now that they've acquired, you know, they're acquiring all this stuff, let's do something with it. You spent the money, now let's make the money. And focusing on retro, this Atari Age acquisition is obviously very retro. It's dedicated to appealing to those and providing for those older fans. The Atari 2600 Plus, which if you haven't seen my Portland Retro Gaming Expo video, I did get to play it there, And the only question I have left is compatibility, particularly with homebrews, because it looked and felt perfect. I got to play it with the paddles, I got to play it with the joysticks, and it felt like playing a brand new Atari 2600, which was fantastic. The video was crystal clear, it had the switches, they felt good quality, the system felt good quality, and of course it looks like a slightly miniaturized 4-switch model. So it looks great because it's kind of a classic design. I love that system, but again, it targets that older demographic. Remastered or recharged versions of old Atari games still targets that older demographic. And that demographic is slowly over time going to get smaller and smaller. I love the fact that they are, and they're... I'll talk about kind of what I want them to become, because they seem to be moving in that way, and I'd like to continue to see them move that way if they do it right. But what I would also like to see Atari do is try to appeal more to the younger gamers. Not necessarily, changing scope and all of a sudden you've got, some version of Call of Duty on the VCS or something like that. The VCS isn't powerful enough for that anyway, but some more modern titles that may not be based on 50, 45-year-old properties. For me, Berserk Recharged, great, I'm in. Missile Command Recharged, all these, remastered games, that's great. I'm full of nostalgia for that stuff. But in all honesty, and despite the fact that my channel is dedicated to kind of that era of gaming and new games for that era of systems, it's a demographic that, if that's your primary demographic, your business plan really is going to suffer between 10 and 20 years from now. The fact is that we're all getting older. If you had an Atari 2600 as a kid, you are in your 40s or older. Unless you had it secondhand from older siblings or an aunt or uncle or your parents. The nostalgia bracket for that is people between 40 and 65 right now. My dad has huge nostalgia for the Atari 2600. He got one in 1978, I think it was, and that's why I played Atari as a kid, but he's 67 now, or at least is going to be very soon. So, targeting that era of gamer, as much as it has been a neglected market that you can now take advantage of and cater to, it is a market that's not really going to be here, at least not in the same way, in 20 years. And Atari doesn't have the benefit of being a Nintendo where every generation got its Mario game, for instance. And so Mario is just as culturally significant now as it was in 1986. Atari doesn't have that. Atari had big gaps, and the last time Atari was a real, meaningful part of the overall gaming landscape was in the early 90s. And as much as old guys like me like to kick and scream and be like, no, Atari was always relevant, it's not really true. I can love something and be honest about its importance in the overall industry. Atari obviously published some good games. It was obviously a part of the gaming landscape, but its real significant contribution to that landscape prior to some of the stuff that they're doing now was in the early 90s. So they don't have that benefit of, 90s kids being nostalgic for it, and early 2000s kids being nostalgic, and kids born in the 2010s being nostalgic. They do have an opportunity to create some kids in the 2020s that may be nostalgic for it, and that will help push them forward. That said, what I think that they are trying to do, and they're starting with kind of their own stuff, but I would not be surprised. The No Swear Gamer, he actually put out a video a few days ago talking about, hey, maybe Atari going to try to acquire the Intellivision licenses, not just the licenses, like buy them from Intellivision Entertainment, make some kind of deal there. And obviously, right now, Intellivision Entertainment has licensed the vast majority of those titles to BBG. We don't know what BBG plans to do with them in the future, but deals like that can change. And if Atari's going to potentially, there's no indication necessarily that they're going to, but if they were to go for, say, the Intellivision titles, do they also try to go for some ColecoVision titles? Do they go for Odyssey 2, Vectrex? Odyssey 2 would be really easy to get the vast majority of the North American library because it's all owned by one guy. That's Ed Everett. And he's not doing much with it right now. I know he's kind of allowed the, some people to do stuff with those licenses. But in that situation, there's a big opportunity because the most famous Odyssey 2 game is, of course, Casey Munchkin, and it was famous because of a lawsuit from Atari. And that's the reason why, if you got an Odyssey 2 compilation set, it would not include Casey Munchkin because although Ed Everett owns the license to that game, or the rights to that game, he can't publish it because of that legal action in the early 80s regarding it and its similarity to Pac-Man. He's got the rights to the character. He could make tons more Casey Munchkin games, but that specific game, which is the most famous game for the system, he can't publish. But if Atari acquired that, they could do something about that. They could publish it because they're not infringing. Like the legal action was that they, on Magnavox / the owner of the rights of Casey Munchkin, couldn't publish it, but Atari could if they acquired it. And then if you're acquiring all this kind of old stuff, pre-NES retro game licenses, do you then, as Atari, become the gatekeeper? Gatekeeper, maybe not the best, doesn't have the best connotations, so I'm not going to use the term gatekeeper, although in the wrong hands it could become gatekeeper. But do you become the guardian of all this pre-NES gaming content? The historical gaming content of all these former competitors, Odyssey 2, Atari, ColecoVision, Intellivision, Vectrex. That would be kind of cool to have all those, because right now those licenses for a lot of those systems are scattered all over the place. Obviously, a lot of the Coleco titles were, and still are, owned by Sega or Nintendo or whatever. So maybe that library wouldn't be as robust, and certainly in television, a good portion of that library was licensed, and so you wouldn't have MLB baseball and just have to call it baseball unless you wanted to renew that license, and I don't know why you would want to. But yeah, so you'd get a lot of, and even a lot of the original Atari titles were licensed, and obviously they can't continue to make those. Like Atari doesn't own the rights to Space Invaders, or Pac-Man for that matter, even though they're the ones that filed the lawsuit against Casey Munchkin. So it'd be interesting to see if they can kind of take these two paths, be guardians of that pre-NES gaming history, releasing more compilations like Atari 50, releasing remasters and re-envisioning of that for retro gamers who are really nostalgic for that era. And some of these updated games, I mean, they certainly hold up, but the fact is that younger people aren't really going to gravitate towards that. So you also have to have that second path of how do we appeal to more modern gamers? Which then makes you wonder, okay, the VCS right now, which is their primary system, I know they're coming out with a 2600 plus, and then I know a lot of people who are far more excited for that than the VCS, but the fact is that the VCS is their primary system. It is their modern console. It's not really strong enough or powerful enough to really push into more modern games that a lot of modern gamers are expecting. So would you get a VCS 2? Would they try to beef it up a bit so that they can publish more modern kind of titles? And I'm not talking about multiplats. Again, I don't envision a future where you ever see a Call of Duty or Doom or any of, you know, these kind of modern multiplats that you find on the Xbox and the PlayStation 5 and all that. I don't envision a future where you see that on the Atari. Where Atari may try to edge themselves in and may have more of an opportunity is edging in on Nintendo. Atari is obviously very, very well known. They are not as well known as Nintendo. Atari is doing pretty decent right now. They are no Nintendo. Atari could only dream to sell as many systems as the Switch has sold, and with the Switch 2 coming out in the next year or two, probably, you know, that's a big competition, but that's kind of the level that they would need to be aiming for, and kind of the market that they would need to be aiming for. Not the biggest, greatest, best graphics, best everything, but something that can pull its own weight. And I think right now, as much fun as a lot of the games on the Atari VCS are, first of all, they're not exclusive to VCS, at least the vast majority of them. And second of all, they're not power hogs. It's a fun little play thing. And its target demographic is still that older retro gamer. So, is Atari going to try to get out of that exclusive retro gamer thing? Are they going to double down and try to just continue releasing or start releasing remasters and collections and compilations and continuing to acquire old properties and see what they can do with that? I don't know, but it's interesting to think about. So, me personally, like I said, I'd like to see them try to be kind of guardians of the past. That's not to say they acquire everything, but let's consolidate some of that stuff that's scattered all over the place. And but I'd also like to see them working towards the future in a way that's more sustainable than doubling down on properties that are over 40 years old, because that is not going to ensure a long life for Atari. It might be good for the next few years, but they need to take that time to kind of work that shift so that in another 45 years, 50 years, there are people still alive that are nostalgic for Atari. So, interesting news. Obviously, Digital Eclipse, a cool acquisition, and now they have some producing power, and I hope they use it to make some money and make some more memories. So, thanks for listening to me ramble a little bit, but yeah, these are just the things that were going in my head, and we'll see you next time on Mike's Gaming Gala.